Packet pushers.
Hello, welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, I welcome a personal friend and mentor to the show, Monika Machado. Monika's journey is a testament to the power of personal goal pursuit and resilience. Monika's career spans several decades in the high-tech industry, ranging from principal engineer, principal product manager, to director of backbone engineering, just to name a few of the positions with companies such as Microsoft and Oracle. It is difficult enough to get into the big tech companies, let alone building a thriving career over decades. Join us as we discuss Monika's journey, uncover her insights on career shifts, and discover what drives her passion for personal growth. Welcome to the show. It is very nice to finally have you here on the show for Network Automation Nerds.
Hi, Eric. Thanks a lot for having me in your podcast. And I'm honored to be talking about my career. And if I can help somebody with their goals and pursuits with their career, that would be nice.
Oh, for sure, you could. And first of all, so Monika, did I pronounce your last name correctly? I mean, you could probably do a better job than I could. So how do you pronounce it?
Monika Machado.
Okay, Monika Machado. I still remember your last name was Monika Ma. Over at Microsoft. So it was like really easy to remember. And, like I said, you've been a personal mentor and a friend for many, many years. When I first joined Microsoft and I reached out to you to see, hey, if you want to be my mentor, just to help me navigate this big giant corporation called Microsoft, right? And we'll dive into that. But to put a little bit of a context, right? So I'm pretty sure our conversation today is going to be fruitful and be helpful for anybody who wants to get a glance on, how to build a career inside of big techs in particular. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get here?
Yes, so I have a long passion for networking, very long lived. My interest in networking began as the first internet network was installed in Colombia around 1993. I was still working at the university as a student.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time I was doing master in electrical engineering and I was doing a lot of research in topics in the electrical engineering field I was interested, but it was quite difficult to find books or research paper. All the books I have were from the, early 80s and late 70s, so I didn't have anything available that was more recent. And making any inquiry overseas or even phone calls were prohibitively expensive.
Right.
So we have a lot of challenges at the time. And then the internet first arrived around, 1993. And I was like amazed by the technology.
Even with like a 56K dial up, right? Or 24K.
Absolutely. Because something that is kind of age in my memory is we have a protocol analyzer. And we just put the protocol analyzer, and the time was you could see the packets, no encryption, no nothing, but you could see things flowing, and that blew my mind. I was like, wow, because in electrical engineering, it's all waves and all that. You can see the form of the waves, but you don't see the information, right?
Yeah. You need to decode it first. Yeah.
Exactly. So at this time, I was able to see like the protocol analyzer was able to decode. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. But it spoke to me a lot from the technology side.
Mm-hmm.
But what really interested me was the possibility for communication. Like we were able to get talk rooms for big universities and have all these papers, download all these papers and all that. So it was like, wow, my brain just exploded at that point, like more really, really into the communication side of things. Like you could talk with people, you could get information. Even at the time it was super slow. And then what you did is you request something, at the time you do chat. I think it was called Talk.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you start like a download, for some document, and you went overnight. And then, 2 days later, you come and the document was coming like in some latex format or something like that. But it was still like leaps ahead for what I had available. So I think that like this really sparkled my imagination about what was possible, with human communication. So that's how my passion for networking started.
Yeah, I mean, that reminded me of the time when for people who doesn't really understand the context, it was, basically imagine like Slack without all the pictures or emojis, just text, right? I remember my first introduction was AOL Instant Messenger and ICQ to a certain point. But yeah, I think that came later, right? Like 93, it was strictly just chat rooms and text based. Was there any like file formatting or can you pass documents over or you were strictly just like chatting?
No, it was chatting, but you can also download files.
Okay. But it would just take a long time.
It take a long time. So again, like you leave some download going for, hours. It was normal. Now you click and then, the download is there. And you get upset if it takes 3 seconds.
Yeah, you're annoyed by like a 5-second delay. You're like, what the heck is this, right? Let alone that was over Wi-Fi. And this was like strictly dial up. And even with those restrictions and even with those, what you see now as rudimentary elements, you could see the possibility, right? And that kind of opened up information that was, previously took days or weeks or, just like physical mail. So yeah, I think I felt the same way when I first log on and just like all these information are free. Like, you mean I don't have to go to a library to get these books? And that was pretty amazing to me as well.
Yes. One thing I really appreciate is living in Colombia and being in a kind of very no wealthy environment.
Hmm.
This was like part of the university infrastructure, so it came to us for free.
Hmm.
And that's a big equalizer as well.
I think we could get into, kind of topic of digital divine where you kind of have to cross this. I mean, and you were in a university, should we say in the context of like privileged, right? Toward high tech and,
Yeah,
at the cutting edge, but there's this digital divine. But once you cross it, this whole world open up to you,
yeah.
but you do have to cross it first.
Exactly, exactly. Of course, you can no diminish the privilege of being already having a high education. To me, like at that point, personally, was big, like eye-opening in the possibilities that were available.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you had this spark your fire within like networking, communication. Then what happened next? Like what led you into, the career path you were on toward today?
Yes. So once we moved to the US for my husband's career. So I got married in Switzerland, and I moved first to Switzerland, and then we moved to the US for his career. And the jobs I was able to get was more like web at the time, starting the web and web administrator and then system administrator, which at the time for a smaller company, you did system administrator was more or less, the whole stack. You did a little bit of the networking and you plug things in switches, program the IP address, sometimes even manually for the servers and everything. And then I did DNS, like you did the internal DNS and the external DNS as well, because you were the system administrator, so might as well do the DNS.
Mhm.
And I also did sometimes email systems. So yeah, you're already doing this, so do the email system. It allowed me like a lot of learning from all these stack layers and solving interesting problems. At the time, you always have problems with the printer, the driver, all these things, learning how to troubleshoot something and how to troubleshoot something, efficient way, and what kind of learnings do you have to have in order to solve the problems, and then file things in your brain so you see similar problems and start solving those problems faster.
So did anybody help you in kind of categorizing your troubleshooting methodology, right? Like, I mean, I remember the same thing. In my first job, the title was system/network administrator. So you did a little bit of everything. I was with a tier two ISP, so we didn't have a lot of people. So I was able to do buying for DNS, mail for email systems, and both Windows and Linux, right? Like today, can you imagine doing both Windows
No.
and Linux and bind and whatever, mail software that you have? I was doing everything and I was kind of overwhelmed, but also learned a lot. I didn't have the capacity like you did to categorize it or having a methodology for troubleshooting. So did you figure that out yourself or did you have a mentor at the time who taught you?
So at the beginning, because I was the only person doing, like in smaller companies I work, I have to kind of do it by myself. But actually, once I joined Microsoft, that completely changed because there you have a lot of structure. And of course, people with a lot of experience doing troubleshooting. And it was like before I joined Microsoft, troubleshooting was more like an art.
Hmm.
And then once I joined Microsoft, it was more like a science. This is like, the kind of steps. And then you see the people, of course, the people that help you through your career, the people you look up to that have all that experience, and you see how they behave when, there is a problem, when they need to troubleshoot, how they do it, what kind of notes they take, what kind of RCAs they write. So yes, I have a lot of help from that perspective with a lot of people that were doing operations for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that as well. It's just, like it's a kind of different environment when you're with a big company that you're standing on shoulders of a giant that will have structured, and there's a structure that you fall back on, right? So all of us, obviously, we have varied degrees of, I guess, teaching capacity or personalities. However, we could all fall back to this base common denominator structure that the big companies provides us. But I know some of our listeners have questions and perhaps they're thinking about getting in from like a smaller company to a big fan type of environment, fan plus Microsoft, I guess. So take us back into that period where how did you get your break into Microsoft? I mean, I classify as a break, meaning you wanted to work for a big tech company, right?
Yes, I think it kind of happened in the sense that I was working for web startup that failed 2001.
As many startup fail, right? That was when the bubble burst and I couldn't get a job anywhere. So yeah, during that bubble time, yeah.
Microsoft happened to acquire the company I was working. So I came through an acquisition, but you could stay or not, right? Like that was completely a choice. After having my first round and then we all went to interview process because we were hiring into Microsoft at the time. So it was different than, just acquiring the company. They were acquiring the people.
Yeah.
So once the interview happened, I got very interested by the technology, what they were doing, and I decided also to join Microsoft. And honestly, move my family from California to Washington was a big deal. It
Hmm.
was a lot like a very personal decision that we have to make as a family because, of course, moving everybody is not an easy thing, right? But
Yeah.
we decided to do that. And, living friends and living like a community, is not always easy, but we decided to do that and then join Microsoft. That was easy for me to join Microsoft. Finding a place within Microsoft was not as easy because I came from a background where I was doing everything like system administration
Mm.
and, of course, the email from my company, which was a small exchange server, one
Yeah.
server, and doing the networking, which was one router and one switch.
Hmm.
Write all of that, and then coming to Microsoft, you need to find like a place where you are going to be doing like a job full time, right?
Right.
That was a little bit like finding like that place. At the beginning, of course, I started working as I was hired to build the lab for my previous company to integrate with the Microsoft network.
Hmm.
But at some point, it's like the lab is built and the integration is done, and I need to look for something else.
Right.
I am a very introvert person, as you know, and I'm always afraid. But at that point, I was like, I need to get a little bit out and start talking with other people, right? Like, I see the networking people coming and helping us to connect things and all that. I see the sys administration people coming, the IT people coming and helping us, set up emails and all that. So I start talking with those people, like, kind of have a one-to-one. People can tell you yes, or people can tell you no, right? But the worst thing that can happen is tell you no and then you go in your merry way. But the best thing that can happen is like somebody tell you yes, and then you find avenues to have a conversation and ask what they are doing, if they have some job openings and all that. So that helped me understand a company of that size. Me coming from very small companies, and I think people like moving from a small to a bigger company, sometimes you feel like a fish out of the water, right? Like
Hmm.
it's so huge. So starting talking with people in different organizations, don't feel afraid to reach out to people and then say like, you have 30 minutes, you have, 15 minutes, or you want to have a coffee. At the time, of course, it was a lot of more personal interactions, in-person interactions. But now we have all this technology, like, Zoom and all that. So it will no matter where the people are, if you are able to reach to them. So once I was able to establish like some people that I was interested on, some people of course told me, no, I don't have time. And some people like, yes, let's talk. And then they explained to me, what they were doing and all that. I got very interested, still very interested in their network, in the Microsoft network. So I start having these conversations. And once they have an opening, I interview for that And I was able to get that role with a lot of personal investment because I didn't know the network that well. So I have to study a lot before the interview. So kind of like at the time, like, Cisco CCNA type of training.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
Yes, I did that before going to the interviews. So that was kind of my first job into the 100% operations because they have an operations team. So kind of getting into the kind of the operations side of the house for the networking. And that was kind of like jumping into the fire.
Jumping into the fire. Well, I think just from that little passage, I want to double click on and zoom in on something that you mentioned, which first was finding a place for yourself within what value do you offer in this big machine, right? So previously you were, should we say, like jack of all trades or jan of all trades, whatever you want to say it, but so you wear many different hats, and it was clear the kind of value that you bring to the company. Operations, you get paged, right? And you solve
Yeah.
the issue, you close the ticket. But in the big company that where the jobs are more specialized, so that's the first part about like being resilient. I think you were able to find a place in the big company that was kind of a transition for you, right? Like not everybody made that leap. And the way, if I paraphrase you correctly, was that you were establishing relationship. You're just talking to people, right? So that mindset of, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Did you just say no, right? What's the upside for that? They could say yes. And then you have like, this relationship that was established even before the position opened up. So I think those 2 points were, kind of, I don't want to those get lost, right? Like you're proactive in, reaching out to people as well as changing your mindset on, okay, now I have to go find my value add, right? Like within this big organization.
Yes, I think you say a word that I didn't use, but I love, which is relationships, because all my career has been based on relationships.
Hmm.
And again, I am a big introvert, so it's really hard for me to go in, like in a big meeting. I will be like the person in the corner looking lost, but I am a big one-to-one person. So I think once you find your way to do relationships, being introvert, being extrovert, whatever, and then you understand that, you can start building your network and your relationships around you the best way that fits your style. But by having those relationships, it helps you so much. I think nobody is an island, like no person is an island, right? So having these humans around you helping you, and the important cornerstone of that is, I think, building this trust and this relationship with other people.
Yeah, I think that's important to point out as well. So typically, especially for big companies, I mean, this is same for my wife, right? So my wife actually is a bit introverted and female, and in a big tech company, she had to learn to speak up. She had to learn how to fight for what you believe is right, and because the air is usually dominated by extroverts like myself, right? Like if people who doesn't mind sitting at the table, even if they're not qualified at all. Like I would say, I'm not qualified for half of the table I sit in, but I'm not afraid to lean in and appear like a fool. But for some people who are introverted, it might be a little bit more difficult. So finding that balance is really, or changing the way that you approach things in certain situations is really key. And you mentioned relationships, so I want to also ask you, what is the key to establish that relationship? Right, you could have 1,000 coffees or Zoom chats, but that doesn't get you deeper into a relationship. So what is the key for you?
I think the main thing for me is being authentic, being yourself when you
Mhm.
present yourself in a relationship. But the most important thing is to add value to that relationship, right? Like
Okay.
it's not always taking from a relationship, but taking and giving. And
Right.
we all have things to give to other people, and we can also, I don't like to use the word take, but always get things from other people, like in any relationship. So I think establishing a trust relationship and being able to bring something, be prepared. Like when you have, for example, a mentor-mentee relationship, it's not only showing up, but showing up, both of them, the mentee and the mentor, doing their homework, trying to understand each other and trying to bring some empathy to the relationship. But both of them need to bring something to the table, because otherwise the mentor is not going to have time for the mentee, or the mentee is going to say like, no, I don't like this mentor. And a lot of mentor mentee relationships do not work out because people don't put a little bit of time to bring something to the other person. I think that is quite important.
Yeah, I think if I may interject a little bit from my own personal experience, because you were my mentor, and I would classify the mentor-mentee relationship as 50-50, right? Like half of the mentor I reach out to did not work out, half of them have year-long friendship and relationship like this one. And one of the key things that I think stood out was you always made time for me, right? Like we have scheduled like one-on-ones, maybe bi-weeklies or something like that. I would say most of the time you show up and I show up. And I couldn't say the same about other mentor schedules, right? Like half the time it gets canceled or, it gets postponed and then just kind of lost in the cracks. So yeah, showing up is one of the things that you mentioned and be authentic, be yourself and always bring something to the table on the reciprocation, right? But I want to ask you as a mentee, right? So the relation is kind of imbalanced, right? So mentor obviously has, more knowledge, more experience, and the mentee is in a weaker position to give back. So what do you think, coming from a mentor's perspective, what do you think a mentee could bring to the table?
Oh, Eric, I love mentoring.
Okay.
I, I love mentoring because I get more than I give.
Tell us more. Like, what can a mentee do for those of us, that are in a mentee position? What can we bring to the table?
So the first thing I get from my mentees is a fresh perspective in their problems.
Perfect. Okay.
First of all, they came with problems I don't have the experience, right? So for me it's a mental exercise as well. I had never been a developer, but I have been a mentor to a lot of developers, and they tell me like problems with the code or problems with people or problems with like their team or whatever issues they want to bring to the table are brand new for me, right?
Right.
I really like that experience, like think about like what I will do if I were in this person's shoes, and then allow me to kind of breathe and think about, how do you solve some problems. So that's the first.
Mhm.
Second is a fresh perspective. Like when I have like my meetings with my mentors, I always tell them, like, what I'm going through. Like, yes, I'm doing well, but I'm having this problem and all that. So I do use something called reverse mentorship sometimes. Of course, the time is for the mentee to talk me, but if I have 2 or 3 minutes to talk, to say something, and then they can respond me back up with their perspective, it gives me like a different perspective in a problem I'm also working on. So I truly love that aspect from being a mentor. And I always tell my mentees, you think you are getting something, but I am getting more. So by those two things, by really getting into in a very safe setting, getting into like a problem that I will never have, or maybe I will have, but I'm not having at the time. Understanding different technologies, like have mentees that come, working in very different environments besides networking, like developers or product managers that are working in completely different products that I am and I don't know anything about, and they tell me about their challenge. I get to understand something new. So I get a lot of learnings from being a mentor, and I get a lot of energy as well.
I think that's great that you mentioned it because you mentioned both the fresh perspective is on the professional level. For example, developer, right? Like you're maybe not in the developer role before, so you get the from developer, so that's professional perspective. And the second was just personal, right? So I think those two goes back to what you talk about being authentic. If you're just true to yourself, always feel like you bring value to the table. If nothing else, you are a individual that's no other person are like you in this world. So you bring that strong perspective and different than your mentors. So if nothing else, just being you. And for me, now I'm learning from different generations on their perspective on podcasting. How do they learn, right? So I think for me, that's a very valid point is just being a mentee, even if you don't have as much experience professionally, you still bring your unique perspective and the mentor could always get something out of it. And like you said, it brings energy to the table as well.
Absolutely. I think if anybody is in the table about asking for a mentor, you should ask. It's a little bit of a risk, like because nobody wants to be, rejected,
Sure.
but the rewards can be amazing for both the mentor and the mentee.
Yeah. So I think if you do that risk benefit analysis, right? I mean, when we talk about relationship, like it's not always in dollar amount. It's just like, yeah, what's the downside of you throwing out this question of, hey, would you, have time to grab coffee or whatnot? The risk is just minimal that you could get rejected. Sure, your ego gets bruised a little bit, However, the upside is, hey, you get to potentially talk to this great person, that this person could actually offer something to you as well. You offer something back for that person. So it's win-win, mutually beneficial relationship. So yeah, I like that as well. So I wanted to ask that you say you love mentoring and obviously you step out of that individual contributor zone, throughout your career. So did that help you transition into a leadership role? And what kind of leadership have you held before the big techs? Let's just start there.
Yes. So, Eric, for me, leadership and management are two completely separated things, right? Like you can be a leader and lead projects or ideas without being a manager, right?
Very true.
This is for people also starting their career, but mid-career as well. Some people feel stuck because they don't get that, and I'm going to do air quotes here, promotion to become a manager.
Right.
But for me, it's very clear that being a manager is a different career path. It's not a promotion path. Like you can choose to be an IC and succeed at that and still have a lot of leadership, or being a manager, which is a different set of skills, right? So once we establish that leadership can be independent management, then I
Mhm.
think you free yourself, because not everybody can be a manager, right? If once you get hired with 10 more people, and some of them are going to become managers and some of them are not, and you don't fail your career because you don't become a manager, right? There are many paths to IC, and then you can exercise leadership in any role, even as a starting engineer, mid-career engineer, or a more senior person. So the leadership is continue that you can develop. That said, having leadership is a very important component of being a manager, right?
Mhm.
People think that leadership is something you were born with, which a lot of people are born with, innate leadership skills, but it's also something you can develop yourself, right? Like, how to become a leader. There is probably thousands of books on how to become a leader, and then the different styles of leadership that adapt to your personality, what kind of, leadership, from where do leadership come from. I would say, some people lead from their head, some people lead from their heart, depending, from like their personalities and all that. So I think doing like some analysis and understanding yourself, like the same way you understand you are an introvert or an extrovert, you understand what kind of leadership do you want to pursue. And the fact that you can learn how to become a leader is very important, because then you are in your own hands, meaning that you can go and develop your leadership skills.
Yeah, you know what I like about
Mhm.
that? I wanted to go back to what you said before on decoupling leadership skills versus management. And what I enjoyed the most about that passage was your management title, and I'm doing air quotes again, that title is given to you by somebody else, right? Like it's controlled by your circumstance. But your leadership skill and the way that you develop it, it's all innate. It's all developed by yourself. So you could do it regardless of your circumstances. So I think that's really important to point out to people who have aspiration to lead, is that you could develop this today, and understanding yourself as the first step, like you said, to start doing it because you control it. It's regardless of what other people are doing in the size of the company you're in.
Exactly. I like the way you put it. The control or the ability to do it yourself, I think, is really important, right?
Right, right.
I think you want to become a manager because that's really your passion. And a lot of people become a manager because they want, like, having a lot of people.
The corner office?
Yeah.
Did we mention the corner office?
The corner office. And then, you go to a cocktail party and you say, oh, I have 100
Uh,
people in my team.
exactly.
That can be like a valid reason. I don't have anything against, somebody.
Sure. Everybody had different reasons, right?
Exactly. But if you want to be a manager because you want to grow people careers and you want to advance a project and you have a big vision for, a product, right? That you want to see all these things through, then I think being a manager is in your charts. So what you need to do is, of course, develop your leadership skills. You cannot become a manager without having a good leadership skills, and be ready to relinquish some of that. Like a lot of very good engineers become managers and they don't want to relinquish that. I want to manage all the code and I want to manage the network and I want to manage. When you become a manager, you scale by people, right? Like the same way we scale how we manage networks by automation, we scale our work by become managers. So we can distribute the work to other people so the people can go and do the work and all the group moves forward together. So to be a manager, you need to be ready to give up some of that long-held technical. It is hard. It is really hard. And
Mhm.
then listen to other people and be open to that. But I think for me, as a manager, the most important thing is being invested in people's careers and being able to provide that guidance and that framework for people careers no matter where they are in their journey. Like, you can get a team that is mixed between very senior people and then some junior people, and you need to be able to create a framework for all of them for their careers. And the other thing I learned over time is being very situational. I have made that mistake again, like talking very high level to people that were not ready for that conversation, right? So being able to target the message, the person you are talking in your team, right? Like, and being very direct. And I think managers also need to build a good relationship with the people they are managing. If it's very superficial, then that trust never gets built and the teams do not gel together.
Yeah, like the culture.
Yes, exactly. So I think creating that relationship helps that the team to work together very well. But you need to build a relationship, and it takes time, right? Like what people need to realize is being a manager takes a lot of time with the people. You are managing, doing one-to-ones, and then some people don't want to do that. So maybe their management style is going to be quite different. But of course, I only have my own experience. So the way I do it is by building relationships and building trust, and that way I can develop like good coherent teams.
So let me clarify the last point where you talk about delivering the right message to the right individual. So what you mentioned was, perhaps you were delivering a message to a person who are not ready for that honesty or frankness. Can you clarify that a little bit on what you meant by that?
Yes, so I think from what I was trying to say is from kind of the business perspective, like if you
Mm,
see there is some problems with the business, or there is some issues well above your head, you are not going to talk that with a very junior people, right? Because they are
mm,
not ready to receive that message. Right?
right, right.
Maybe things are not going great, or there is going to be some changes coming in the future, and all those things. So being very specific about the message you deliver and the readiness of the person to get that message. And one thing about management, Eric, is sometimes you need to tell people if you are not a good fit for this organization. And there is no
Mhm.
easy way to do that, but this is one of the messages. You need to be very on target. You cannot say, HR make me do this. You cannot say that. You need to be specific about why this is not a good fit, and why this is not talking about a person not being a good,
Competent
yeah,
or yeah.
competent. Yes, it's just not good fit for that particular role. Yes, thank you for that. So once you realize that this person is not a good fit, then having that conversation and guiding them to, like, where they can go, if they can go somewhere else in the company, or looking elsewhere, there's a good guidance, right? Like that. But that's what I mean by being in target with the message, is you need to be really specific about the message you are trying to give, and also put yourself in the shoes of the receiver. How ready are they to receive that level of message you are saying?
Yeah, I think I like that last part is everything you talked about was from the perspective of the recipient, right? It's not about you delivering the message. It is also about how much they could receive. So depending on where they are, like say for example, a junior, network engineer, they're still struggling for the tactical stuff on how to get this done. Where do I click? What command do I put in? Versus a senior person who's more aligned with like the company's KPI, here's the annual objective that we need to hit, and I'll give you more freedom to, go however you achieve that. So every message that you deliver was based on the recipient's ability to receive that message. So I like that fact about being a leader is putting yourself in the other person's shoe. And depending on where they're at, you want to meet them where they're at and deliver the most impactful message and guidance and slash mentoring that the person could have.
Yes.
Yeah, so I also want to touch on this point because you're one of the few female manager, director at Microsoft, at least when I was there. And it's not fair, obviously, to ask you to represent 50% of human race and say, what is it like for being a woman in, high tech? And obviously they're higher leadership and Microsoft is one of the more equitable company, right? Like out there,
Mhm.
and they do have that. But I do want to ask you your personal opinion of being a woman in high tech, both in an individual contributor, in a leadership role, in a mentoring role. How does that impact your own personal career, or how did that, the good and bad, the ugly, right? Like being in that, being female in high tech.
Yes, I think I was very lucky, to be honest, Eric, because of course it all starts with what kind of education do you get, when you are young, right? Like you cannot pretend to have a lot of leader engineers when there is not a lot of engineers that identify as female, right? Like the
Right.
identifying female group is quite small, even, in high school math classes and, engineering. When I started my engineering career, I was one of two women in a 52, 53 group class for electrical engineer. And they were other engineers like sanitary engineering or mechanical engineer, which didn't have any woman. So it was a challenge just to start studying or electrical engineering building at my college. I love my college, but at the time we didn't have a bathroom for women in the building.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm not. We have to run to the main engineering building, even if we're doing labs or anything, to use the bathroom. So you see that some of these things were not ready. I always thought because my husband thinks I'm a pessimist, but I am not that much of a pessimist. I always thought like once I reach old age and like this is going to be equal, like man and woman will be completely equal,
Right.
but that's not the case, right? Like I think it start all with education. There is a lot of push to bring more girls to the math and science and all that. I agree with that, but I also agree that in general people need to follow their passion. In general,
Hmm.
like they need to follow, but it all starts with sparkling that passion in people when they are young and treating them fair and equal at the beginning. Like you don't give the construction and all the like very interesting toys to the boys only, and to the girls you give yet only certain types of very gender toys, like right, you start like this education early. So I think that was, but that's a problem, like a lot of very smart people are trying to solve, like how to get girls into the early education and all of that. So my own experience as a identified woman is it has been very interesting because again I'm always leading from my heart, I think, and trying to build these relationships. And I have been very lucky to have a lot of great network, right? Like support, mentors, coach, sponsors that are helping me immensely with my career. And every time, of course, I am a mother, I have two kids, and I'm a wife also, I have a husband, and all this, my family is always taking priority. I have been able to ask in my job, can I take a break? I was a manager at some point and it was too much for me, right? Like I was managing a big team in network operations and security. It was a great team. I really like the people there, but energy wise, I have like, a toddler and 6 years old at home. I couldn't do it. Like it was near impossible. So I asked my manager, can I move to an IC role? And they helped me. They like, yes, of course, you can move to an IC role. So I moved to an IC role where I have hours that were more predictable, that, been doing operations and me wake up every day at 3 a.m. because, something was going on. And absolutely, did that hinder my career? I don't think so. Would be different for me if I didn't ask for those breaks? Maybe, maybe not. It helped me re-energize. It helped me like, getting into a good place mentally and physically to be able to be present for my family and to be able to do a good job at work. So that helps. So I think for me it's like driving a car. If I can put that analogy, sometimes you can put the gas full and then you go, and sometimes you need to go slow
Yeah.
because something is happening around you and you need to be cognizant of what is going to happening around you with your family, with your own health and all that, and then kind of take the break And then don't be afraid to speak. Like most managers will be open to that conversation. If somebody tell them, I have this big project and all that, but I cannot do this anymore. I want to do like a smaller project. People will accommodate. We're all humans, and communication is the base of everything. So being able to communicate that, and I think I was able to do that effectively many, many times, like, until I was not, but that is another story. But I was able, like in my mid career, I was managing people. I was like in this role, and I was like, I need a change. I need a change because the time, the hours, and that doesn't agree with me and my family. It may change, or because I really needed to learn something else. And when learning mode for me is most, and me personally, everybody is different, but for me personally, learning mode is more an IC type of role. So when I wanted to learn something really deep, because I was really interested, like when I was learning routing protocols, I became an IC. So I was able
Yeah.
to spend time with myself learning to the depth. I feel comfortable with, routing protocols so I could do my job better. So I think being able to pivot between, those roles was very helpful to me as a woman, because I was able to take on the other things that were going in my life.
Everything you said, I think those are valid and came from your heart, your own experience. So, I appreciate those. But I think if nothing else, the representation really counts, right? Like because of the two women in that 50% class, I bet they have a ladies' room now, right? Like, so the representation itself really counts. Like if you go into a building and there's the women's restroom, what signal does that deliver to your prospective student, right? Who's visiting the class for the first time? So you just being a representation of yourself and being, like you said, work-life balance, right? Like it may have been the first time that your, manager at the time heard about this and they were able to accommodate. So just being there, being true to yourself, I think if nothing else, I mean, obviously everything you said, but if nothing else, just being there, being yourself and represent really counts. And I want to kind of dive into what you said toward the end on, yourself and you learn best when, you're an IC. So, you transition back. And I think that goes into, your transition into product management, right? Like toward the latter years, you actually transition into product management, into the 5G world and all that exciting feel. So tell us a little bit about, having multiple different transition, right? Like IC, mentor leadership, maybe work-life balance, and then transition into not only an IC, but a whole different world. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so let me be very personal here, because my transition to product management came before big change in my life, which is menopause. I don't think we talk a lot about that, but women
Hmm.
experience menopause in different ways. And for years, I didn't understood what was going on. Like I just feel completely out of it.
Mm.
It was very difficult. Like, I was like in a meeting, and I was like with all these emotions, and it was like super, super hard for me. And at some point I lost the passion for what I was doing. And it was with the help with, some mentors and some other people. Like when I wanted really a change, people are like, think about when was the time when you have more fun in your career.
Right.
And I was like, I had to dig really deep into like what was that time. And that time was when I was building new products. So I was told like, why you don't try to be a product manager? That was kind of like the guidance I received at that point. So don't be afraid to ask, like, having a sounding board once you feel like at the end of, I cannot do this anymore. People can give you
Mhm.
other ideas. By myself, I will had never think about, becoming a product manager. So having some other people that helped me like realize that that was a viable option for me was the first step. I say before, like once you're an engineer and you become a manager, you need to leave some of your engineering pride aside. And then
Yeah, yeah. Your habits. That just yeah.
once you move from engineering to product, that's a big leap, and you really need to think differently. And you absolutely need to kind of put your engineer in the back and start bringing your product to the front.
Okay.
And it's all about understanding the product from the customer's perspective, that we as engineers don't necessarily talk with customers as much, right? Like somebody else talk with the customers, and to our customers, right? Like our customers don't necessarily are the end user. They may be building a product for their own customers.
Right.
So understanding that whole interaction become really important as you become a product manager. So I think probably my first 6 months as a product manager, I was closing my mouth and listening very attentively to other product managers that have a lot more experience that I have, listening to customers, listening to customers, listening to business people, listening so I could learn how to become a product manager. Of course, I have to talk with it. It was no, but I think my learning style shift from doing a lot of things like as an engineer. My learning style is go to the lab and do Conf-T and do all these things, right? Like routing and then reading the books and all that. My learning style also shift a bit when I become a product manager to kind of absorb things through learning, through listening to what people have to say, trying to understand their experience and trying to understand their perspective. It was also the time where COVID started,
Hmm.
right? So we all have to adapt to new ways of communicate and being very comfortable talking to a microphone rather than in person. And I think that also was a learning process for me and probably for a lot of people, right? That, we all experience COVID in different ways, but for work, it was just a big shift. And I think it helped me to become a better listener for understanding the product and understanding how my customers were using the product. One big thing I didn't often think about was finance,
Okay.
how the revenue of the product and how what it costs to produce something, right? When you are in engineering, you usually don't have like that kind of, unless you are in a senior leadership role that I did at some point, how was the cost of producing my work? That of course I understood, but I didn't understood like the flow of money from the customers, right? And I think learning that was amazing. I really learned a lot from all my finance partners and business planning and all that. So I think it was like a crash MBA course. You kind of learn a business from all the perspectives. Working with marketing was amazing. Like have great marketing people that teach you a lot of things, how to say things and how to put your product in the best light and all of that, what kind of events, what kind of like promotions, what kind of blogs do you write. So marketing is really like a big arm to get your product out there. So the first 6 months I spent as a product manager was like a steep learning curve, and you need to be ready to do that as you transition from engineering to product.
Hmm.
Is again prioritize the learnings from what the customers are saying, what their experience are, but also your internal partners that are been doing this for a long time. They keep being that finance, business planning, or marketing, or other product managers and all that. But one of the most important thing is to have a great relationship with your engineering team, right? Because the engineering
Hmm.
team at the end of the day is the ones building the product, and it's really important for them to also understand. I think in a lot of cases, we don't give engineers all the information, just features. But I think when you tell the customer story to your engineering team, there's a purpose there. Like, oh, a customer is using this and is using this for this thing. So understanding what the customers are using it for, explaining the engineers how your customers are using a product is really important. So that gives them like better tools to do their job. But also, to be honest, if you go and write code in and out all day, sometimes it doesn't have like a meaning. But if you understand like a customer is going to use this to propel their company or to create this amazing experience in a stadium full of people, then it's a different story.
Yeah.
The meaning of the work you're doing changes.
Yeah, I think that goes back into what you said earlier about delivering the right message at the right time. So, giving more purpose on the engineering's code and helping them to see into, the finished product and how that product related to perhaps revenue, perhaps, storytelling on the message for marketing, how that impact the bottom line. I think all of that goes into, what you said about it's a crash course. The first 6 months is an MBA crash course on the transitioning into a very much different role than a engineering IC or leadership role. So I think that is a great segue into, where we're going to talk about. I'm sure those lessons were, worth another episode, but but I do want to come back into, what we discussed on what kind of recommendation would you give for a engineer just starting out today, right? Like knowing everything that you know, what would you give the engineer who's starting out today? What direction should they go? What is the most valuable thing that they could do for themselves if they're starting out?
Oh, yeah, I have some opinions there.
Hey, should we mention AI or no?
Oh, really?
Okay.
Of course, learning the technology is a very important aspect, but I think that my first recommendation for people starting their careers right now is you need to think the long term. Like your career is
Okay.
starting now, but longevity is important. Like you are going to be working 30, 35 years, like, long, long time. You are not going to be able to achieve a lot of things if you are not in good health. So I think the most important thing for me I can say is prioritize your health. There is a lot of things about physical health. You can exercise, health, nutrition. I'm not qualified to recommend anything, but be mindful of your physical health. But I think more important is be mindful of your mental health, right? Like there is a lot of stressors. There is a lot of challenges that come from a job in high tech, either small or big company. So being mindful about your mental health is going to be really important, right? I think for people starting their career, having some balance is important,
Yeah.
right? Having balance between the work, which is going to absorb a lot of your life, and having some time to do some things aside and then taking care of yourself is important.
Yeah, I think we're also subscribed to kind of this hustle culture that we have right now or previously. But I think COVID and along with a bunch of other stuff allow us to kind of reflect on that, on, whether it's it kind of prioritization, right? I don't want to put my value over other people, but I do agree with, finding a balance and taking care of yourself, both physically, mentally, and just your well-beings. So what about people who, or not people, maybe it would be more specific, maybe for engineers who want to transition into a different role, whether that's a leadership role or a different discipline like product management. What kind of advice would you give those who are looking toward that for that?
So I think the main thing is to learn, right? So learn about the new role, learn about, what it implies. And if you are able to get into a new role for different type of work, I think prioritizing and protecting the time for learning is very important, even for people that are keeping, like, a new network engineer. If you get brand new into a company, there are going to be hundreds of things that are happening at the same time. If you don't protect the time for learning, you are not going to progress as fast, right? Because
Right.
first of all, you need to understand how you learn. And then second of all, you need to have the time for that learning to sink in, right? So even if you are in your own role or if you are transitioning to a new role, learning is important. I think the other thing I would recommend for people is to own something. Like in my own career, when I started owning little things that nobody liked. Doing ACLs in routers, like nobody liked to do that.
Or especially at 3 a.m. in the morning, my favorite thing to do is just look at echoes.
Yes, exactly. But I start kind of like owning that. So I become the person like everybody came to for these alcohols. I become trustworthy with that. And then,
Mhm,
of course, it's going to be something different for everybody. And I never felt a passion for ACLs, to be honest. But it was
mhm.
something that nobody else wanted to do. So I find my little niche and I start kind of doing it. And then once people recognize you as the expert of something, then you can start building on top of that for your career. So either if you are like a network engineer or a systems engineer or a developer starting your career, or you are somebody transitioning, this is kind of the same advice. It's like get there and own something that nobody else is owning, and then become the expert for that little thing, and then you can build on based on that. And I think that's important. And the second thing, or fourth thing, I don't even know where I am, is
We lost count.
lost count. Take some risk, right? Like in the sense, not like go and do a change, but take some risk with, people. Ask for a bigger assignment. Like,
Mhm.
if there is a new feature people are talking about and then you want really work on that, ask for it. I have a very nice training a few years back about living your life by design rather than, my career happened and, everything happened that way. But living by design is like you plan for it. right? And then you don't wait for, people to ask you, hey, do you want to become a manager? Hey, do you want to take this feature? Hey, do you want to, have lunch? You go and ask them, right? Like you prepare yourself and then you prepare for both cases, like rejection and positive outcome. And once you're ready, then you ask for it. You need to be ready for a rejection, of course, like that happens. And, the worst that can happen is like, yeah, no, I'm not giving this feature to you. But the best that can happen is like the outcome can be amazing. You can become like, owning this feature or, starting working in this new project that is really interesting. So that I think that's important. And then and you mentioned AI, of course. AI is right now everywhere and is there. And I think a lot of people are like, okay, you need to have like 5 years of experience with AI to do this role or 3 years of experience.
And then AI has been only around for like two.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think if there is a role that have a lot of AI words and all that, I recommend you go and read a lot about AI and ask for it. What they can tell
Mhm.
you, no. Or you can get a nice job. We have a lot of AI components. So I think this kind of like taking risk goes a long way. And you need to leave, of course, a little bit of your ego at the side because like a rejection is always hard, but the rewards can be amazing. And from my own experience, I got a lot of good things by asking, and I got a lot of rejections, of course, but I also got a lot of good things that happen in career changes and all of that because I asked those questions. So don't be afraid to ask, even you are starting or you are in a transition mode, right?
I like that. I want to bring up a good risk-taking story, right? And then it ties directly into our conversation, directly into the show. Because, when I was doing network automation, when I was learning network automation, I was on your team and I wanted to take Kirk Byers' class for Python for network engineers. And I didn't know if, you were approved or not. And luckily I asked and you approved and the rest is history, right? Like, I had Kirk on the show. So Kirk, if you're listening, hey, kudos. And we'll have, Monica to thank for my own career and as well as, you getting a little bit of dollar for your training. So yeah, no, I just thought of that. And then, ties directly into what you talk about taking a long view and risk taking. Sorry, I cut you off. You were going to bring up another point.
I just wanted to say my last kind of piece of advice because I didn't got this until like I was very in my mid career. But I think for people starting their career or transitioning, I think we don't have enough education in finance. And
Mm,
I think people need to be proactive in that sense, like understand finance, understand, where your salary is going, all of that. There are like things like companies offer like 401k and all that that people like for the longest time, I didn't know what 401k was. Like I know
mhm.
they are taking some money from my paycheck, but I didn't know there was investments in the back of 401k and all that. All these things I didn't knew, but luckily enough, I was able to, understand and learn more about those things. It goes a long way, with a very changing economy and, with jobs being as they are, and to have some caution and to build on that caution for the long term. So I think it's like learning to cook. Like some people don't want to learn to cook. Fine, you can get, some takeout and deliver to your home. But if you learn to cook, then you have that power. It's the same with finance, right? You can have like, somebody manage your thing, or you can also have somebody to manage your thing, but also understand about it. And it's never too early to start. And then people that are just starting now, you have the time to build your savings.
Right. The power of compounding. Obviously, that was not expected, but it was very welcome advice, right? Because, me coming from my undergrad was in finance and I naturally gravitate toward making money and entrepreneurship and all of that. But yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I'm sure the listeners will appreciate it as well, especially the younger ones. The power of compounding, understanding a little bit about finance goes a long way. It's like exercising that muscle. Your muscle will only get stronger if you exercise the right ones. So go and exercise your learning muscle as well as your finance muscle, right? Like, just learn a little bit wouldn't hurt anybody and you can always get the help that the company offers. So Monica, I know we're coming up on time. Where can people find you if they want to follow more of your work? Where can they connect with you?
So I am available in LinkedIn. We can put, my LinkedIn in notes
We will.
and my email address as well. So Monica, Monika underscore Machado, Machado at hotmail.com.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So you don't mind people emailing you.
No, I don't. Yeah, of course.
Okay. Nice. Okay. Cool. 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 Well, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate our conversation. It's always good to catch up. And I hope, people get a lot of advice from this episode because I think you offer really a lot of good insights and career advice for them. So thanks again for being here.
No, thank you for inviting me, Eric. It was very fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedbacks for Network Automation, our guest Monica today, or this episode? Send us some follow ups at packetpushers.net/FU. With the FU stands for follow up, of course. And we do really want to hear from you. Also, check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, Slack channel, and so much more. You can find podcasts such as Network Break for weekly news, Heavy Networking for deep dives in network technologies, Packet Protector for security, and so much more. Of course, we thank you, the wonderful listeners, for your support. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation would never be enough.